God of War Ragnarok is a direct sequel of God of War 2018, set about 4 years later. In those 4 years, very little has changed, allowing a returning player to essentially continue from where they left off at the end of the previous game. This is almost definitely the best way to experience Ragnarok, as the catch-up provided is honestly so bare bones it may as well not exist, distilling the entire previous game into less than 2 minutes, missing out entire storylines, and failing to even hint at any of the intricacies of the plot. The game then starts at a molasses pace that takes quite a while to pick up. If you remember in my review of God of War 2018, I said that although the story was competent, it, quote, didn't have any moments that really made me stop and think, or laugh, or cry, or really feel any emotion at all, unquote. Now, I'm aware that Ragnarok came out before I wrote that review, but it still almost feels like the story writers were listening, because God of War Ragnarok's story is absolutely packed with emotion. It absolutely made me laugh, as the dialogue is great, and there are quite a few amusing moments. It absolutely made me cry, more than once, actually. I also felt pretty angry at the antagonists at points, and exultant in victory when certain enemies got theirs, so to speak. Everything from the dialogue, scripts, scenarios, etc. felt like an improvement on the previous game. Well, almost everything. One thing I do have to give 2018 credit for is its incredible pacing, which is definitely something I feel Ragnarok struggles with. Not just the slow start either. There are several segments of the game that feel like a bit of a trudge, where very little story progress is being made. Unfortunately, most of these segments occur while the player is in charge of Atreus. Although I acknowledge that these story beats do have a satisfying payoff in the final act, at the time of actually playing, the payoff is a mystery to the player and feels a little unnecessary at times. I think the overall story also suffers from never really having a defined end goal until far too late in the game. Sure, I suppose you could say the goal is to avoid Ragnarok, which is a Norse term essentially for the end of days. But this goal is too broad, and even the characters don't have any idea how to do this. So the story chapters are bookended by these round table discussions where the protagonists and their allies decide what to do next. The round tables themselves are quite enjoyable to experience, at least at first, but the result of no one really knowing what's going on and essentially acting on information as it comes in is a very fragmenting effect on the overall narrative. I defo got to a point towards the end of the third act where I almost lost interest entirely, as I was starting to feel like I was being sent on these wild goose chase missions only to come back and the characters dream up some other harebrained scheme to send me to a new realm and get me to play more game. I think this feeling was slightly compounded by two things. One is that honestly, it kind of felt like the writers had a checklist of all the 9 realms and they had been told, okay, you need to think of an excuse for the protagonists to visit all 9 in the main story. The second is, and I know this might sound kind of strange to say as a negative, but I honestly think the main mission feels a bit overlong. I really think some of the slower parts could be cut back, though not removed entirely, and this would only improve the pacing of the game. The only problem with this is that we are already paying £70 for a game that takes less than 30 hours to beat, and I can't put any stock in its replayability. This is an expensive game, but you do get quality for your money. The voice acting is once again 10 out of 10. The music is gorgeous, the visuals are stunning, and though the overall story lacks direction until the final act, each part is fun to experience, well written, and comes together in the final act in an incredibly satisfying conclusion. Honestly, if I could sum up the end in 3 words, they would be satisfying, epic, and brilliant. Let me put a pin in that for later, because I want to talk about the gameplay. I played both games on the medium, quote-unquote standard difficulty, and felt, on the whole, that God of War 2018 was a balanced experience. Not so with Ragnarok, which somewhere about 2/3 in suddenly seemed to spike in difficulty. And when I say difficulty, I don't mean complicated enemies, I mean fake difficulty, where hits take huge swathes of health. This felt really unnecessary to me, as surely someone who wants that would up the difficulty setting, and all it did to me was annoy me enough to turn the difficulty down a notch. There is a difference between difficult and punishing. Making a player take more damage when hit is punishing, and it is not what I look for in video games. I'm also sad to see the issue with the side missions hasn't been resolved from the last game either. It's still impossible to understand the difficulty of a side mission until you are already being handed your ass on a silver plate by a boss that is probably harder, definitely more punishing, than the final story boss. Please, can there be a more obvious UI of which side quests complement the main story and which are for those looking to be challenged, so I can avoid the latter? Aside from those gripes though, the gameplay was great. I mean, exactly the same as 2018, but it wasn't broke, it didn't need to be fixed, and thank God it wasn't. The combat is still a tiny bit repetitive, but fun. The bosses are often fun and cinematic, and the puzzles are enjoyable, and neither a cakewalk or too taxing. To loop it back, I think the fun gameplay carries the player through the slower parts of the story, so a player is never truly bored, while the payoff at the end will leave you with a smile on your face and a tear in your eye. Though far from perfect, I loved my own playthrough of God of War Ragnarok. Although the pacing was wonky, the overall plot was excellent, and showcased some truly interesting and three-dimensional characters. I will be careful of spoilers, but I will say I nearly cried when one of the antagonists died. He was a dick, but the story showed you why, showed you what he meant to his family, and his death was a genuine tragedy. When a story can make you mourn the death of an antagonist, you know something is going right. There are a lot of characters in God of War Ragnarok, but I feel the narrative provides enough attention to each to make them memorable. Again, no spoilers, but the story also provides an excellently executed plot twist that honestly made me say, "What the fuck?" while playing on my own. Absolutely excellent writing and directing of the cutscenes. Ultimately, while I still feel the price tag is a bit steep, I would recommend this to anyone who enjoys an emotional story. Though, thanks to the catch-up being lacking, I'd say play the still solid God of War 2018 first.